time to move into the final phase of the PhD defence. Well, maybe the penultimate, I would say. So this is the defence where the examiners get to ask questions. We've also had a couple of desires for questions at the end, so if we have time, we'll go to those from the audience. So Steve, I think it's over to you first.
Good morning, everyone. You can give us scores if you think the questions are good or bad. I think you should be examining us. This is a really big day. It's your chance to show off the knowledge that you've accumulated, the understanding that you've accumulated over a long time. And it's quite stressful. And I deliberately added to the stress in the coffee break. Did you notice me talking with your parents? How did that feel? He was like, uh-oh. Because your parents know you really well. They know what works, what makes you crazy. That's what I was trying to find out. And they've suggested to me that you're both an idealist and a pragmatist, which is an interesting combination. That you have a vision, that you want the world to be a better place, but that you are grounded in some form of reality. You can't just dream. And I think that's really a fantastic message from a parent. And we're going to find out if it's true. Right? So I want to ask you, I'm going to start with a practical question for the pragmatist. I want to shout bullshit, right? I really do. When you start telling me Viking are selling safety as a service, they're selling maintenance contracts. Right? They're not. There is no term in that contract that says we are guaranteeing the safety of anyone. How much of the PSS world is BS? Is bullshit?
So what you were saying is that it's kind of, you put this ideal situation of how PSS would be, but in practice it's much more practical and it's not as extreme as I presented in the case of Viking, for example. So I think that's I think you're right that it's often we see these that they are put out as some idealized situations, but in practice it's much more closer to more traditional ways of selling products and adding services on top. But that's not necessarily a bad thing, right? In my opinion. It can also be a good solution. So, can you say question again? Because now it's like,
yeah. Well, no, I think I want.
I don't have like it's 80% that is bullshit. That's what you're saying.
Nobody sells power by the hour.
Yeah.
Right? Nobody sells safety as a service yet.
Yeah.
So maybe my question in a more direct yes or no way is what they're doing actually moving them in that direction? Or is it, no, we will paint like greenwash. We will just paint something as if it's PSS and really it won't ever go further than the way that we're delivering it today.
Yeah, because they are basically a manufacturing company, and that's so. I don't know if they will ever be a service provider company. I don't think so, because this is also just one of their proposed offers. So their main business is still just to sell life rafts and safety equipment. So I guess the more extreme case comes from companies that are actually service providers from the beginning, like a laundry service company or something like that. But because then they are a service provider, they would be characterized as a service company with the indexes and so on. So what you're talking about is whether manufacturing companies will ever go to be total service providers instead.
And maybe the big incumbents, you know, the big companies that have been producing products for a long time, they're playing with this. I would fear that if they play with this for too long, they will lose business. That actually they will be, you know, nobody has a right to continue to exist as a large company forever. And I think that at the moment I'm observing that I think that they're playing with PSS, and the really interesting examples are coming up underneath them or around them, and often from competitors in their own value chain. All right, that was an observation.
Yeah.
I've got a sort of I don't know whether it's an idealist question or really the most direct question that you can have as a researcher. One of the opportunities that you have in writing a thesis is to demonstrate your skill as a researcher, because if we like what you do in answering our questions, we encourage the university to offer you a degree that allows you to mess with other people's minds, right? That's the qualification you're about to get.
Yeah.
Okay? So we need to know that you understand the difference between good research and bad research. So please answer research question 1 with an answer, not a tool. So that's what I really want to push on this. I would like an answer to the question that is a statement of knowledge. What do we know which helps us answer the question? I'm really confident that your answers must be good because you've built good tools. But building a good tool is not an answer to a research question.
Yeah.
So do you mind just putting up your research question 1 and actually giving a direct answer? What do we know?
Should I go to the answer, maybe?
So you've suggested research question 1 is characterizing a complex system.
Yeah, how to do that.
And you've broken it down into 2
Yeah.
sub-questions.
So in order to characterize a complex system, you need both a qualitative and a quantitative analysis. And in a qualitative analysis, you need that in order to identify the drivers and barriers. And in the quantitative analysis, with the system boundary completeness. So is that, it's not answering the question, or?
You're getting closer,
Yeah.
I think, but I do think that you're missing the very precise answering the question dimension in what you've written and what you're stating. So, for example, why is identifying drivers and barriers so important?
Yeah, okay, so we could also say it the other way around. If we just want to do it in a quantitative way, then we wouldn't see these drivers and barriers in the contextual system. So we could, if we just did, for the hospitals, for example, we just did the quantitative analysis and we showed the hotspots in terms of environmental impact, then that wouldn't help them make the decision on where to make changes, because it also influenced by the political agenda and other decisioning parameters. So that's why you need to do this more qualitative study where you actually discuss with them what is driving you in environmental improvements or economic improvements, if that's what you're looking at. Because we want to do these assessments in order to improve the existing situation, otherwise why would we do it? So
the complex system, especially in things like a hospital environment, is what we sometimes call a socio-technical system.
Yeah.
And some of the dimensions of that system are not accessible to quantity and quantification.
Yeah.
Is that what you're telling? I'm trying to use fancy academic language and pull you towards that.
Yeah.
And in an attempt, because I think that the idea of drivers and barriers comes from a core idea that you've identified, which is that quantitative is not sufficient to understand the system well enough to influence that system towards better performance.
So an answer would rather be, in order to characterize a complex system, we need not only a quantitative analysis, but we need to supplement that with an analysis of the socio-technical system in order to identify drivers and barriers, or something like that. Yeah.
Can I repeat?
Yeah.
I was also struggling a bit with this question, because you say characterize, and actually you convert that into measuring and assessing.
Yeah.
You have hospitals and marine industry, but you could also, so these are apparently systems with different characters. So you could also answer the question, I guess, with kind of giving typologies or trying to create a language how to describe the hospital, how to describe the marine industry. But you clearly have decided not to do that. You clearly try to use them as examples and not try to create an overview of all the characteristics of complex systems.
Yeah.
That's where I was also struggling with the way the question was formulated. If you would have said how to assess, then it would be more like this answers, I would say.
Yeah, because here you want to identify some characteristics because it says characterize.
Yeah, but instead of just identifying, you also immediately start to assess them.
Yeah.
So you almost jump over that.
Yeah.
But I understand also it's almost impossible task to develop them.
Yeah.
Just one comment. The characterization part, when it's all about evaluating the systems from this environmental, where does that fit into the methodology part, the characterization part?
You're thinking about the last part of the question?
No, I think this characterization of the systems.
Yeah.
Where does that feed into the
I think
assessment?
the wording was chosen because we are in the descriptive phase here, so we want to understand how does this existing system works and what are exactly the drivers and barriers for environmental improvements, and therefore we need to characterize that system somehow. So it was more, it could also be how to understand a complex system or something like that. So it's we are not assessing any changes yet, but we're just trying to understand what can we influence in the existing system. So I think that's why we chose to use the word characterize here. Yeah. So I think understand could also maybe have been used, but maybe it would be been.
But it actually feeds into your guide in the reference system, right? Or
yeah. I think it actually we are already here moving into some assessments because we do some assessments.
But here you use that.
Yeah, I do. I didn't know that at that time. Yes, but yeah.
Understand.
Yeah.
Can we try research question 2?
Yeah.
So can you give me 1 or 2 example challenges?
1 or 2 examples of challenges?
Of the challenges, because I've been writing down challenges that are in your thesis.
Yeah.
Writing down different versions of the same challenges when you're speaking.
Yeah.
Consistency, challenge, I'm going to suggest. So when you were speaking, you said the first challenge is how to define the system boundary, and then that's verbatim, and then I was trying to catch up with my handwriting, so I may have got the rest slightly wrong. The first challenge is how to define system boundary to include appropriate services.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah?
Yeah.
Where's
I
that?
have it in the other.
Where is that on your answer list?
It's the last one. A sufficient level of completeness in the system boundary definition. So I reversed the order of the challenges. So, but that's because I've tried to explain these challenges many times, and I found it easier for people to understand if I start with the system boundary and then move to the function unit and then the reference system. But I think this order is, if when you want to address the challenges, then you would do it in this order, as is also in the guidelines.
But in my mad, crazy world where I would like consistency, that sentence is not the same as the one that you said, and the one that I've just read out.
Okay.
The first challenge is how to define the system boundary to include appropriate services. I understand the connection between the two concepts, but they're not exactly the same concept if they're different words.
Mm.
You with me?
Yeah.
Which one do you think is the preferred answer to the question?
I think it would be, okay, so that would be a long answer. So it would be ensuring a sufficient level of completeness in the system boundary by making sure that service elements are included. That would combine them, I guess.
So you're describing the challenge as an underperformance. So I need to ensure something is good, because if we don't ensure that, it will normally be bad.
Yeah.
Is that right?
Yes, I think so.
Because you use that word ensure. I want to ensure sufficient level of completeness.
Yeah.
So the challenge is incompleteness. Is that right?
Mm-hmm.
I'm playing with English here.
Yeah.
But I'm trying to be precise. So the answer to the question might be that the challenge is incompleteness, and the solution to that challenge is to follow a particular methodology.
Yeah.
Yeah?
Yeah. So it's not the system boundary that's a challenge, but it's the incompleteness of the system boundary.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I think that, so typically when you're writing down the challenges, you are writing down underperformances rather than how you solve that underperformance.
Yeah.
And I think this is where the pragmatist in you overtakes the idealist and researcher.
Mm-hmm.
You do.
So I'm trying to answer.
You're an engineer, aren't you?
Yeah.
You
Sort
want
of.
to use you want to use the language of problem solution. That's the inherent. You can feel it the other side of the room, right? You don't want this to be about research. You want it to be a problem with a solution,
Yeah.
right? If you want a career in academia, you're going to have to learn how to somehow massage that language into research questions and answers, as well as the excellent skills that you're showing in problem and solution, that particular skill that you've demonstrated really well in this. I've got 1 minute. I've got one really interesting, for me, question.
Yeah. So
we had this conversation. We've only met once before, and I told you I hate paper-based
if you
theses.
tried to scare me with talking to my parents, I guess the first time we met was even more scarier. So Steve actually came to me, he didn't know who I was, but he was just saying that he hated article-based thesis. And I didn't get a chance to answer because then the bell rang and we had to go in, and I was like, okay. But then we met again in the next break, and you were like, oh, okay, I'm going to be.
I'm sorry, I didn't mean to be quite so aggressive, but I do mean it. In general, writing a very long document made of fixed blocks of documents that you've already written for other purposes that have to go into other systems of review that have to have a sense of individual completeness is a massive challenge. You have done the best job of this I've ever seen.
Actually, what I did
Right.
when we went in, and you had said that I made the figure with the how it all fitted together.
Fear is a wonderful motivator. No, honestly, this is the best job I've ever seen of this.
Thank you.
I still think there are challenges in taking this particular approach. I'm going to ask you a question which is a favor. I personally don't want to give my students this problem to solve, but imagine that my university decides we're going to go down this route. I would like you to prepare a 1-hour presentation for first-year students how to write a thesis using papers, because you've done something really special. So that's my last question. Will you please explain to the world how you did such a good job on this, because there are too many really poor quality implementations.
Yeah. Okay, so should I do it now?
I think it's quite a quick answer, I hope.
But the reason I chose to do it like this, so I have the articles as chapters. So what you would usually have, either you have like a monograph where you explain everything, and then you maybe have some articles in the appendix, or you have like a really short summary, and then you have the articles, and then you have at the end some answers to the research questions. So I choose to put them in as chapters because I also felt like I have some other results than what was in the articles, and I could put that in between as chapters. And then also my articles are not that much overlapping. Some of them are, but I think that if you have a really,
Can I interrupt? How much is that luck, and how much of that was planning from the very beginning, knowing that you wanted to use that article in a chapter? That's the sort of a guidance and advice that I'm hoping you can help other people with.
Okay, so the honest answer is that I made the articles to be interesting articles. And then I did a lot of work on how to integrate them together and build the story with them. So, and I think that's the right way to do it.
So there's a very strong design language coming up. I designed this thesis. Yes, I had these fixed components.
Yeah.
I had 10 to choose from. I did it in a particular way. That design process, I think you need to tell the world about it, because you've done a really fantastic job.
Okay. But I can get help from Daniela and see we can do that. Yes.
Sounds like a guest lecture at Cambridge is in order then. Steve, should we move on to your question?
Yeah. I'm associate professor here at PTU in another department, but working with life cycle assessment mainly. And yeah, I'd also like to congratulate you with the thesis. I think it's a really nice job. And you've done a lot of work, a lot of good work, and we obviously see that also in your presentation, that you have come to some nice results with this. In my opinion, it was a bit long to read, but I think that's because you actually forced us to read your papers, which is something some assessors, my examiners might not always do, but we were kind of pushed to read all the papers all the way through. Not the 45 papers that you mainly based the thesis on. And yeah, it was good. But took some time. But I'm going to address and maybe I'm going to start out with the same kind of bullshit thinking that Steve came with. Say, is there a challenge at all with this life cycle assessment? Isn't this just bullshit? Isn't this the same challenge for all life cycle assessments? And I know you probably answered this a lot of times before, but can you expand on that? I'd like to.
Okay, so yes and no. First of all, compared to if you want to do a life cycle assessment on a glass bottle versus a plastic bottle, then this is more complicated, and there are these challenges.
That's a simple system. Yeah.
But I think that if you want to make interesting life cycle assessments, then you should always think of these challenges and look at the system, even for product assessments. So yes, I think that you're right, that there are also challenges and solutions for more traditional product applications and all types of life cycle assessments. And I also think that LCA as a field is growing into looking at many different contexts and systems in general. So I think that it's appropriate to give more guidance on how to do this thing, so we don't see assessments that compare a bike sharing system to privately owned cars without questioning that, because I have seen examples of that in the publications. So I think that, so I think it's a gap in existing guidelines on LCA, but I think you're also right that a lot of these things also apply for other types of assessment.
You said broadening the life cycle assessment methodology. That's actually has nothing to do with PSS, which I also like, because a lot of standard products have the same problem. The example I always use, what's the functionality of an ice cream? How many hours does it keep your child happy? Or how do you compare that with going to a playground? Or we have a lot of these problems in PSS. So I think you started as PSS, but actually you're criticizing, or rightfully criticizing LCA. And this example is indeed an example of a bad LCA, I guess. Because it misses the point. It actually also misses the point that we have many impact categories which you don't cover, like plastic waste circling around, blowing away into the oceans. I mean, we always have these limitations in LCA, and people in the LCA community tend to think LCA is perfect and the rest of the world is kind of, that's qualitative. All right. That's all right. I want to strengthen that point.
Yeah, well, I agree.
So,
I'm not even sure this is a question. I really like this diagram, this picture, because it makes about 1,000 points. We can just talk forever just using this picture as a background, so I'm going to steal it. The one that you're making is the simplified product LCA versus simple product LCA question. I'm pointing out the weakness of that type of analysis, in that it gets to be used by somebody to affect something. Somebody's making a decision at the end of the day. I would argue that the people who are running this festival are making a decision about cleanliness and about image, and maybe bringing people to enjoy cleanliness, so that might have a rebound effect that is positive, that it educates people not to throw rubbish away and let it blow into the sea, for example. That's really hard to build into an LCA
I know,
with confidence.
But I think it's still a relevant story, and that's why I think that the qualitative statements are just as important as what you can actually quantify.
So I'm going to agree with you. It's really relative, and it's It's really relevant, in part because I want the designer of these to think about that. In order, if that I don't want that to be an unintended consequence, that we help people think in a tidier way. I would like it to be an intended, designed consequence.
Yeah.
So how does your methodology help the designer find those, what did you refer to them, secondary benefits?
Yeah.
How do you help the designer find secondary benefits using your method?
But I think that you said it, because when they present the result of the LCA, they only use it to pinpoint that their product is better. But if they did an assessment like this, then they could build that argument into it and say, but we also have these secondary benefits, that we have a much more cleaner. So even though we use 50 of these instead of 4 plastic bins, and the result shows that it's maybe marginally better or something like that, then we also have these benefits, which are actually the starting point for making this, because that is the incentive for making these bins, that you can collect the garbage and have a much more cleaner festival. So it's...
So for people who are doing this type of solution, is the hoped for or designed for secondary benefits overwhelming the rest of the analysis, in the sense that those benefits are so much bigger than the environmental costs of creating these things?
Yeah.
Is that their desired objective? And in which case, we don't need an LCA, because we've already changed the mind of the designer. That's a sort of provocative statement. Please respond. It's not a very good question.
What was the question?
If the designer already has this view of, good, I want to design a system which has excellent secondary
but what I
benefits,
think,
they don't need an LCA?
But I think it could still be relevant, because what if it shows that, okay, so maybe we don't need 50, but if we can have 30, then it's still environmentally better than 4 bins. So can we do something so we don't need that many of these, or I don't know, but we can recycle them in a way so we can still optimize the system, also from an environmental point of view, which has nothing to do with the cleanliness and other parameters.
So even if a designer arrives at the problem with an interesting intention, the assessment methodology can still help me find better solutions.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Maybe to connect to that, I was wondering, this is really well written and beautifully laid out, really good, congratulations. But I was wondering what it actually was. Is it a designer's guide to help to understand how you indeed design the system as in the best way without really trying to quantify? Because there's actually very little about quantification. Mm-hmm. Or is it an LCA guide how to help the designer or nag the designer with all kinds of considerations? I'm wondering, how do you position, who is it actually written for? Is it the system designer, or is it the product service designer, or the analyst?
The LCA people. Well, the intention is that you would have both profiles in collaboration. So it actually intends to support designers, and then you can have some LCA knowledge, but then you can also have some LCA experts involved, which can help you do the quantitative steps in more detail than what is covered here. So either you are designers with some LCA expertise and you can use it as is, or you can collaborate with LCA practitioners. But I think it can also it can be both, because it can also enables LCA practitioners to have some of these design thinking in the process.
But this is the problem I often see when I'm in an LCA community. LCA people think that designers are waiting for their input, and it's not happening. I'm an old guy, in 1990 you had a really nice O2 organization here in Denmark, which was about a designers organization which was going to go for environment. And we imported that idea in the Netherlands. I thought that would be a great platform to discuss LCA. And they all said it's boring. One time I could present it, and then they wanted to talk about concepts, about mechanisms, about new ideas, and it completely fell off the table. And because designers typically don't want somebody nagging them with figures and facts, and so I would even propose as a follow-up that you actually write 2 versions of this. One of the helping the designer with a qualitative and ideas and examples, which there are already quite a good few one. And the other is a need for these nasty LCA people who want to know the facts and want to calculate and don't understand the qualitative.
Yeah.
That's good.
Can I add to that? I think the idea that designers don't want to be confused by facts is
It's unfortunately
It's a
true.
wonderful one. On page 15 of your thing, whatever you call it, you've offered 3 audiences.
Yeah.
So 2 of them you've just mentioned.
Yeah, and then there's
And
the decision
But you've
maker.
ignored the strategic decision maker in answering that question.
Yeah,
So when I read it, according to page 15, it seems very clear that you want to try and find some traction inside real life organizations, and any one of these 3 could be the entry point. And you can see how actually if I was in one of those 3 positions, I could take this up and bring this in. Is that a design compromise? Shouldn't you have written 3? Going here.
Yeah.
Is that a design compromise because you've only got enough money to
Yeah.
print 1
yeah.
and enough time to write 1?
Yeah, and I was actually thinking that if I wanted to do something for the strategic decision maker, it probably wouldn't have been as elaborated. It would probably be a 3-pager or something like that.
That's cruel.
Because it's just to, you know, get the idea and, yeah, we want to initiate this type of project, and then you have the designer and the LCA practitioner who needs to work with the actual project. So it would have not been 3 copies of the same book, I think, but different format. Yeah, but I still think that the strategic decision maker is important here, because it's important that you have them in the loop, especially in the beginning and the end.
Well, we already saw this designer, you're not designer, but anyway, you already said, well, it's already qualitatively a benefit. So why do we need all this? you said it already, right? But as an LCA person, you say, oh, but we need to somehow quantify what are the environmental benefits. If we want to be sure that we do this absolute decoupling that you actually mentioned in your papers, D or whatever, we need to quantify at least somehow. Right?
Yeah.
But don't get me wrong, I support that too. But what makes people tick, what brings the process is more the inspiration, the qualitative. But in fact, you need a kind of learning accountant who actually checks the numbers, because you have also examples where you show it's maybe not so good. So it is both needed, but to motivate them and to be the idealistic pragmatism, have that part, you need to find the languages, and maybe that's a whole PhD on its own, how to engage with these communities so that they indeed start to understand each other and build that bridge somehow.
Yeah, so in this case it is designers who designed this, and they don't have any environmental LCA background, and they just did this LCA in order to communicate the benefits. So again, they do it not for optimizing the system or to take any decisions, they just want to show that it's better. And I think that's the problematic approach, because you can always formulate your system and your LCA so it shows you what you want to see. So I guess it's both a matter of also teaching designers how they can use LCA more practically when they design their systems, and for LCA practitioners, I guess, is to help find out how you can communicate the results to inspire other designers. So I think there's a lot of interesting work to be done in making these communities collaborate more. And I've been in the middle of it actually, because I'm situated in the construction and production section of the university, but I also had supervisor from the quantitative sustainability assessment group, so the LCA people here. So I have been in both camps, so to speak. And, yeah.
But to address that, say one of your limitations, say, is that this is too generic. So would you really go for making, or how would you go about making it more specific? I mean, say now it's for decision makers, designers, and LCA people, and you could make 3. That's one way, but it would still be generic in the sense that you.
So would you then need to have specifically for the maritime industry and then specifically for the industry? Then So I guess my point was more that from the industry point of view, then if you made something that was industry specific, then it would target their issues directly, and you would have more room to go into the details with their particular challenges such as ones I mentioned from the ship and so on. But again, I guess the market is bigger when you make it generic like this, and yeah. So I think maybe the format would have been different if I wanted to make a tool or approach or something for the maritime industry. I don't think that this type of book would be what they need. It's more.
Have you followed a little bit on the product environmental footprint process and or environmental product declarations in general?
Yeah.
About the troubles of making these category rules, which are those that decide how to define your system, how do you do, what do you take of impact, etc.
Yeah.
Do you know about the challenges that they see?
I've only heard about it. I haven't been part of the process or anything, but I can imagine the discussions that have been there to make a consensus on this. But I think you know a lot more about the process than I do. But but you can see just the discussions of attributional versus consequential LCA and how they can really get people into
emotions.
I can imagine how it can be to make these.
Okay, but just to make sure we're ticking over at the right pace. That's the end of our second 20-minute block. But the third one is onto implementation and impact, which I think we're already blurring into very substantially. But Mark, I think it's your opportunity now to make sure you get all the questions off your chest as well, and then we can blur the boundaries and move back into general questions afterwards.
So, so Mark Goedkoop, Operations Sustainability in the Netherlands. So, I'm sometimes credited for bringing up this whole issue because in 1990 we published a kind of informal report. It was not a scientific report. We did it for the Dutch government. They thought, like we're now thinking about circular economy, that product service systems could maybe solve all our problems. And we tried to describe that and then described even the rebound effects. And actually the reason for inviting this is I thought, well, that's great. I now get an update on what has been happening since then, because I actually haven't really followed it very much. What was interesting, there was an EU project after that, the MAPS project, and the Japanese government suddenly got interested. There were actually 3 conferences paid by the Japanese government because they thought it was great. And they also thought it would be solving all the problems. And then it died down more or less as a concept as far as I could see it, because it was for a consultant difficult to find who's the client. We can see, nobody asked, can you design a PSS? But of course it is always part of PS. It's part of the design process, and I think a lot of companies are now not even doubting that they should look at the surface system when they're designing. So that has evolved. What surprised me a bit, and that's not to blame you, that the LCA community has been circling around a little bit around the same topics all the time. And in the end, halfway you somewhere say that there's little demand. Actually, you mentioned that also there is a niche market. But you started actually with good examples where it's not a niche market. And there are a lot of companies now basically building on PSS. You can't even buy a professional photocopier, I think, anymore. You buy copies, and that industry has already completely shifted into that. We were a bit connected to Michelin, who doesn't sell tires anymore. Well, they still do if you want, but they take over the truck tire management. So there's a lot of things happening, and sometimes I was missing that a bit. Now to come to the questions, indeed we were already a bit in that, how to implement this, how to convince people. What I found really interesting is you suddenly come up with the CE concept, and actually if you would have put CE here and blockchain in, you would really have a big sale somewhere. Because that's much more.
I tried to convince my supervisor that maybe we should do that.
Okay. You make a second version.
Maybe it will be something else 2 years from now. So.
But anyway, it's not really serious. But
but it's true.
But you somehow more or less implicitly connect CE to PSS. Can you
can you elaborate a bit on that? Because you try to explain it, but maybe it's not clear for everybody, maybe not even for your supervisors, why CE should be on it.
Yeah.
Can you explain the link a bit better?
Yeah, so I started this project actually 4 years ago, and during that time, circular economy has just it's really big now. And even the PSS conference was about circular economy and circular perspectives. So I thought I couldn't do a thesis on PSS and environmental improvements or impacts without dealing with circular economy. So that was one reason. And then what we also see is that people start to talk about circular economy instead of PSS. So it's kind of also taking over the concept in some way. So in order to not be behind on that, I wanted to look at that. And then what we also see is that many companies, they just go blindly into this circular economy field, like with PSS. So to see, okay, if we make these services, or if we do this recycling strategy and we take back our products, then it's good for the environment. So I wanted also to challenge that and connect, to show the connection between the concepts, first of all, because they were used synonymously, yeah, the same way, and also to be a bit more critical towards both concepts in terms of their potential.
Yeah. What I'm trying to get to is there's almost a kind of disappointment through this, and I also in my introduction said PSS was not sold very well, it's not really popular, it doesn't be, and suddenly CE comes in, and suddenly it's popular. So have you thought about why PSS hasn't never reached the front pages of the paper and CE has? Is it in terms of marketing? Is it what is it that makes it so attractive?
Okay, so I think circular economy, first of all, the economy part plays a big role. I think that because it's actually promoted as a concept where you can build, you can increase the economic growth, and at the same time you can do it in a sustainable way. Yeah. So I think that's one of the main reasons that this concept is so popular, because it really talks to the business guys in the companies. What was the other thing I was thinking about? I don't know. Yeah.
If you talk to people in the streets, you usually think it's recycling. That's the first thing they have.
Yeah.
What is, and that's fine, but it has nothing to do with PSS. Is that the answer, that they made it more generic, or how? Yeah, I'm trying to look how to make this concept more popular, and then maybe linking to those bigger, more vague concepts.
Yeah, so how to make PSS more popular?
Yeah.
So
or forget about PSS, how to make this thinking more popular. Is that the answer?
But I think that the circular economy community, or the other thing I was thinking about was the whole promotion of circular economy through the Ellen MacArthur Foundation and all of this. I think that has played a great role. And I think that the circular economy philosophy can be a promoter also of PSS. It actually already is. So I think that we can use it in that way instead. We're not talking about PSS and that can enable circular economy, but we could let the circular economy movement also promote the PSS.
Okay. Please fill in if you want. But so we clearly have warnings. So we said it's inspiring, the circular economy, like this is done without much calculation. Clearly, we also should be worried that this popularity of CE lacks this kind of boring accountancy role where you check things. How can we? And you try to also show the difference between really good CE solutions and not good CE solutions.
Yeah. So maybe I should take the. You have the framework there. I can see.
Yeah.
So we have it.
Yeah, good to do that.
Mm-hmm.
That's your main framework. Yeah.
So the starting point for making this framework was to challenge this conception that actually I often talk to people like what's the difference between PSS and circular economy? They actually think that it's the same thing. So I wanted to show the distinction. and also to say, okay, so just because we are offering something as a service, it's not automatically enabling a relative resource reduction or circular economy. So I wanted to take that up first, and then when I started looking at circular economy and the whole, the literature on that, then I saw that it's often synonymous with this resource decoupling. So I also wanted to show that that's not the case. So that was the starting point for developing this. Yeah. And then I identified these different strategies and enablers to be used as inspiration to say, okay, if we want to build something that is circular and we want to use PSS as the vehicle, then we need to build in these strategies. Otherwise, it's not going to be better. And I also challenge the fact that it's not just about recycling, but it's also about keeping products in use and lowering the resource consumption during use, which is actually for the operational efficiency, like for the ships, that's one of the main motivations there.
So you initially started, the attractiveness is you can have economic growth. It's not bad to have economic growth, and that's one of the premises. Like we had that also in the cradle-to-cradle messages, that you can have indefinite economic growth as long as you get cradle-to-cradle certifications. They do it a little bit more objective. But then you introduce suddenly the point of decoupling growth and load. And there, I was missing that a bit in the lower part, which is the essential part where you look, is the burden you introduce indeed lower than the burden you avoid?
Yeah.
How can we see that from a decoupling perspective? If we do that per function for driving, that's fine, but how do you avoid that people start to drive more? How do you actually bring it in? You say there's little quantification being done, it's also difficult, but can you describe a bit, how would you quantify this rebound effects in terms of alternative consumption, in terms of
so we have two types of rebound effects. There's the direct rebound effect where you start driving more, or you commute more or something like that. And I think that part you can partly mitigate by having the right functional unit. So the example from before, not looking at one garbage bin compared to one plastic bin, but looking at the system. So that can be partly mitigated there. So the tricky part is the indirect rebound effects, which occurs mainly because of the economic difference, but can also be because it's just more attractive, or you need more skills, and therefore it's not as attractive, and the substitution is actually not occurring. So in the picture we also saw that we still had the plastic bins in place, so the displacement had not happened yet, at least. I think the tricky part is really this, with the mitigating these rebound effects. And one thing is what designers can do to do that. For the economic part, I think what you can do is that you make the system so attractive that you want to pay more for it, because that will even the economic imbalance. But if you want to quantify the rebound effects from the economic rebound effects, for example, there are methods that you can do that with, but it's not that common.
But if I pay more for a product, that will either go to the shareholders or the staff. So the economic rebound still happens. The money doesn't get burned. Sorry, the methodological horror.
It's correct. But I also think, is this economic rebound, is that, I don't know, maybe that's too much, but is that an effect of you say, the growth economy that we have as or the growth philosophy that we have in our Western society, at least, all over globally, I would say now, right?
Mm-hmm.
So, can you mitigate rebound effect when we have a growth philosophy?
Yeah, I don't know. No? Can you? I think it's.
We try to describe that in this very old paper. We said if you introduce car sharing, and we had real customer data, so we could see actually some people drove less, some people drove more, but on average less was driven, and that study, and that situation. So we then realized you have the consumers have more money to spend, and that's how we try to define the rebound. So what is the alternative consumption? Do they take singing lessons from that extra income, or do they go to the Costa Brava in Spain and put more holidays? And this alternative consumption is actually the problem, I think. You make things more efficient, you make it more attractive, maybe you lower the cost, but then something happens with the disposable income. Is that also how you look at it? Because I missed that.
Yeah, but it is, and I think, as you said, you can choose to just say it's used for some average consumption, or you can try to find out, if I save money on this particular thing, then I will spend it on this something that, so you know it's something in particular.
So the essence is that we have to, if you want to have the growing economy, the essence is that you have to lower the environmental impact per euro spent. Isn't that the key parameter to understand?
Yeah.
But it's not nowhere in the reports, at least that, or I missed it.
Yeah, okay. But that was actually what was also in the paper B. So it's but it's fun. But it's just I think this is where PSS is really interesting, because you can actually add services that are less carbon intensive, and then you can have something that you're willing to pay for the service part, which has a lower resource consumption.
Yeah.
So this is where it can really make a difference, and I think that's where the designers can think about these things. So how can we build value into the system that is not resource dependent?
The way we formulated it to the Minister of Environment, for which we did this project, the problem is the cheap junk. So the cheap products which have a lot of materials for low euros, that's a problem, and you should move to that. And later the EU made also an assessment which product groups are considered to be cheap junk because they are very effective in polluting. And they found the cheapest way to pollute the environment is to eat meat, and after that drink dairy. So you could, but you saw a factor million between activities with the best ratio and the worst ratio. So I thought you should also play around with that when you have systems.
Actually, it wasn't part of my PhD project, but I worked a lot with that in my previous work. So I have done some assessments on different product categories, and we can see that like health services and these things are the ones with the lowest impact per money spent. So that can give some indications on which types of consumptions you should have. So you should like buy services, you should, these things.
I have a question or comment to the paper or to the figure here actually, because the focus here is very much on resources, which is the circular economy strategy on resources. But the paper you co-authored with Monia and we looked a lot into what are the environmental impacts then of avoiding these resources. So isn't it a problem that you don't look at environmental impact and stuff, but only look at resources there? Or?
Yeah, so in this paper we focused only on the resources to show the point. And yes, I think that there could be some misalignment. So if you talk about environmental impact instead of resources, then there could be some another dimension to it that I haven't treated. So yeah, that's a good point for another type of study. So for this paper we just wanted to illustrate this in terms of resources in order also to keep it a bit more simple and show the points that we wanted to make. So yeah, but I guess many of the principles will be the same if we talk about environmental impacts. It's just because many of these are really indirectly related to the resource consumption, but you could of course see some other things if you were looking at toxicity or something like that, then it might not be really directly related to the resources. But,
I think many of these resource reduction aims that you have here are actually also, you say, environmentally beneficial,
exactly.
Because you try to reduce the need, you try to reduce or displace. So it's not so much about the recycling. So you're more in the inner circles of the circular economy, right?
And that was also an argument. Okay, so now this paper has been through a lot of reviews, and we have had a lot of discussions with reviewers during the process. And one of them was like, okay, you're focusing a lot on this relative resource reduction, and you want to reduce, and it's like you're not given enough credit to the benefits of recycling and being more outer circles. And we had some of these discussions, but I think it's even if you talk about the recycling, it's still the main goal is to ultimately lower the need for primary resources. So that was what we wanted to show here as well. Yeah.
Okay, so that comes to the end of our third 20-minute block. So the cavalry have discharged their rounds independently, and now it's fire at will. So you're welcome. Any outstanding questions, you're welcome to jump in and take them up with Louise. And of course, if we finish a little bit early, there was a couple of questions from the audience as well, so we can always bring those in.
I want to hear those from you.
Yeah. I also would like to propose that to really reserve time for that.
So why don't we break usual format, and I can mix those questions in. Tim,
yeah,
you have a question.
It's
Appropriate time for you?
Yeah, perfect. Many thanks for a really nice, not just a presentation, but the PhD in general. Louise, it's been an absolute pleasure, as we've told you along the way. I have many questions, but the one I'm going to restrict myself to, it builds upon the question that Mark asked you about why was PSS not so popular and circular economy is. I think, if I was to answer from my perspective and then build upon that, the difference is that PSS is a means and circular economy is an end. And when we've been looking at PSS on its own, we've been always trying to think of other ends to qualify the means. And now circular economy is an end where PSS is one of the solutions towards that. I think that's what you try to go critically into in that part of the research as well, is to say, can we go the other way around and see, is PSS always a good proposal for circular economy? And if we take the circular economy perspective, are we doing better or worse environmentally at the end of the day? Are we leading to absolute, in this perspective, resource decoupling? And then moving on from that, looking at PSS and servitization from a customer perspective is one of your proposals for future research.
Yeah.
What would then be the difference in the methodology? So looking, as we're in, if we were to take this further in your postdoc, towards the customer perspective, what would you do differently in order to keep testing whether PSS is a good means to the ends of the circular economy? And which direction would you take the research into? Would it be into looking at the different alternative uses of the disposable income and look at how to incentivize the customer there? Or would it be other solutions from a design perspective, how to design a PSS for a customer perspective to achieve a circular economy end?
Okay, yeah, I think what would be really interesting is to look at the PSS from the customer perspective, where you actually take this look and say, okay, where do we have the needs that we can build into a PSS? So we, as you said, so we can, so we are allowing to pay more for these services, so it actually adds value for us. And then I think what is interesting from the customer perspective also the procurement of PSS. So I didn't have a lot of time to go into that, but I did look a little bit into it, and I think it's very interesting to see how customers can actually influence this process by putting up demands in the procurement, and that's also related to the circular economy. So can they actually, can the customer push this agenda by asking their suppliers to create these circular solutions for them? So I think the customer has a lot of power in that sense, and I think it's very interesting to look at that, and especially also in the public sector, because they have some other agendas than just the economic parameter. And,
So if I may, so you're basically saying there's different perspectives in going forward with this, whether it's a B2B or a B2C or a B2G customer, because they'll have different motivations and therefore different. You have different possibilities to affect the sustainability performance, you could say.
Yeah.
Before you take the next question, can I roll on? I want to ask a question about Viking in particular, but you can generalize, because certainly part of the research that we've done on PSS suggests that the origin of most large incumbent organizations starting to think about designing the value they deliver to their customer differently, i.e. as a service rather than as a product, originates in the customer. So Rolls-Royce Power by the Hour started when Singapore Airlines said, we're pissed off with you. right? I think that customer bent is somehow already there, and we're not seeing enough writing and research about the involvement of customers in a co-creation process. Is that true of any of your examples, like Viking? Was that part of, you know, it's like, we don't want to maintain the life rafts. Was that part of the logic of that
I don't know how the
service?
motivation was from Viking, but I know from the other cases with Alfa Laval and Hempel that it was as much from the customer perspective, that they actually tried to challenge Hempel to say, okay, couldn't you be better at monitoring your paint and help us find out how we monitor the fuel consumption of our ship, because it is really depending on how your paint performs. And they were more reluctant to go into that, because that meant that they would have to design services and have new capabilities that they didn't have.
So maybe we need to stop working with people like Viking and start working with their customers, because they have power, they're making things happen more quickly and more strongly.
Iris is nodding, he's sitting in the ship owner in Tom now actually, so he knows about it. Yeah.
Well, Harris is actually the other question, so that might be a perfect.
Yeah.
No, I'm moving away from that subject, sorry. I worked, my name is Iris. I had the honor and the privilege to work together with Louise in this project. What was the other side of the coin? This was looking at environmental impacts to LCA. I was looking at economic impacts, mainly through LCC. I have a question. It's we don't a guideline. Now you make the guidelines where you show designers, LCA practitioners, and strategic decision makers on how to do a complex analysis and follow a methodology that's a little more bulletproof, and it's not just echoing their own opinions. Now my question is the following. In a slightly dystopic world that we live in, where our convictions matter much more than what are the actual facts, what we think matters much more than what it actually is, how can you communicate a complex and in many cases nonsensical result that come from those guidelines? How do you communicate that a hammer is 2 times better than a Toyota, or that the worst thing you can do to the environment is that you can fly to a vacation or eat meat? So that's my question. The communication part, what comes after the guidelines have been successfully executed?
Yeah. Okay, so how to communicate that, but I was just going to answer slightly differently, but because one of my concerns was actually with these guidelines that they would be too less commercial, so you wouldn't be, because I think that in many cases you want to do these environmental assessments to prove a point or something like that, but here you are forced to be very objective and look at it like that. But I also think that from an industry perspective, from my previous experience and the few conversations that I've had with the potential users of the guide, that this actually creates a credibility to their analysis, which are quite important, especially because you have these LCA people who always comes up and ask the nasty questions and claim that you are greenwashing or something like that. So I think that these guidelines can help build this, support the credibility of these assessments. And I guess that it's difficult to communicate these weird results if you have them, but I also think it's important because it shows the real picture. So, yeah, I don't know if that answered the question of what you think. Yeah, okay.
Maybe to follow up on that, I would be very careful communicating such messages because it would confuse everybody. But what comes up here is this Viking example, is that we have been thinking about that before also, that you have this issue of strategic fit. Sometimes the company doesn't have the staff and ambition or the possibilities to have that. And I think there was this example also that you have to be on almost every harbor to do some of the maintenance. So it is not only reluctance or conservatism, sometimes it simply doesn't fit, or they haven't thought of the idea to make it fit.
Yeah.
And that is something more that would be a PhD on management, change management, I guess. That's another topic, so it's important to bring that point in.
And then we also saw a problem is that a lot of these services are actually not needed that often. So for example, in the case of the performance audit, once they have been on board the ships once or twice, then they have found the issues, and the ship owner can take that and distribute that to the other ships, and then there's no need for the service anymore. So is that really a strong business case then? And for the hull cleaning service, you maybe you only need to clean the hull 3 or 4 times during a 5-year period. So it's a lot to build that service in a company if it's that limited, the actual demand of it.
So you have this, one of your audience, your strategic, what you call it, strategic decision maker is really important to have that overview of all these things, because you can design it beautiful, you can have a brilliant LCA, but then still doesn't happen.
Yeah, exactly.
I mean, there are some really interesting examples. One I can't resist to mention, that is a company called Koppert. When we started in 1999 somewhere, we interviewed them, and they were just a startup, and they said they used to sell pesticides, and they said actually farmers don't want pesticides. They realized that because it's a mess, it's a hassle. So we take over and we make a contract. This is a pest-free crop. We take care of that, and if we fail, you get an insurance fee. You still get your money. And it was a kind of niche. And now I realize they have become a multinational, and they are finding out that pesticides are always expensive, so you try to avoid using them. So the whole incentives change in that model, and they start to do biological treatment, and there you need specific knowledge which a normal farmer doesn't have. So if you really understand it, and you understand where your strategic fit is, you can make it big.
Yeah.
And I even found there is now an international association of companies who work that way. So it's really rolling out very fast at the moment. But it's indeed finding the good fit, the understanding the client, understanding the business. So all these things are far beyond the concept of LCA. So you cannot all solve that at the same time. So that goes into management literature or management research.
Yeah, I agree. Yeah.
It's a pity that, and again, that's what's really a pity, that the LCA community has been so blindly thinking about very simple products like car sharing, bike sharing, and that they haven't really gone into that. That was really one of my big disappointments in you guys in the LCA community. You haven't looked around what's really happening, and I can't blame you because you're trying to focus on literature.
Yeah.
Yeah, sorry, more like a statement.
When the focus is on environmental and even in the title it's environmental impacts, but sustainability is more than environmental. We need to have the business case. That's clear. That's what you also talk about here. But the social aspects. Don't you think that there's actually potentially a lot of benefits in these PSS?
Yeah, sure. So that was it would have been nice to have a third PhD student looking at the social. We talked about that, but that was not within the scope here. But actually, one of the things we talked about was looking at this with the ship dismantling, and that of course have some environmental issues, but the biggest problem there are the social issues associated with that. So if we wanted to look into that, then we would have to also look at the social impact. But yes, there are a lot of interesting things to discover within the social impacts as well. We have a research project on that as well now, from a circular economy perspective at least. But it was, I haven't looked at the indicators for social impacts in this project. Yeah.
Would you add that on the circular economy? Great.
I just want to add a piece of information in.
Yeah.
It's not really a question at all, so I'm not going to try and phrase it as one. This thing about rebound effects and secondary benefits can be quite complicated, and in your guide under box 11 you decided to take car sharing as a way of illustrating rebound effects, and you've suggested, for example, that people might abuse the car, but they also expect to get in a cleaner car and leave a dirtier car. Therefore, there will be more car cleaning.
Yeah.
And that's a sort of example of a rebound that you have to build into your thinking if you're going to design better solutions, environmentally better solutions. We've been doing some work with some very big clothing retailers, and Strangely enough, the single biggest environmental benefit of clothes sharing is in cleaning, because industrial cleaning at scale is per garment massively environmentally better than doing it at home.
Yeah.
That wasn't obvious until you do the analysis properly. And so you can actually, your particular rebound effect there could actually become a secondary benefit if your design thinking is looking for that. So this is the sort of final test of your tool. How successful do you think you're going to be at getting designers to think in these interesting ways about, if I'm going to design a PSS, not only do I do what the customer wants and turn it into a service and dematerialize the product, I'm actively going to go and look for these secondary benefits and worry about the rebounds. Not just as a label, I'm actually going to get excited about that. How do you make that happen?
Well, I think we see some interesting examples where you collaborate on these things. So, for example, in the case of the clothing company, I guess they collaborate with someone who does the cleaning for them. So we have these configurations where you have these collaborations and build on each other to make these
I think
systems
the
work.
challenge is for me, how do you get the designers to open up their mind to this area of possible benefit and higher performance? Traditionally, these are people who design clothes and shops. They don't design cleaning systems.
Yeah.
So how do you get them to be excited about thinking about cleaning?
Yeah.
That's part of the challenge.
Yeah. I think so. Also, the fact that when you are looking at these things, you often end up looking at systems that are completely different from what you are working with. So, yeah. I don't know how to get the designers excited about it, but yeah.
I do have a last question. I see that you're standing up. Can I offer a last question?
Sure, we've got time for another one round of questions, I guess, if you have any outstanding.
Can you show me slide 89?
Sorry?
Can you put slide 89?
89. Okay, yeah.
89? That one's
Yeah.
You claimed near the start to be an action researcher. Is that what you were telling your supervisor when you went to the festival?
Yeah, I should have been there. I can see I missed out on that.
That's the frivolous version of the question. The more practical version is, now you know what you know. If you were the CEO of Viking, what would you do? What would you do differently? This is where the rubber hits the road, as the metaphor suggests. They need to do something because it will be fantastic for them and for their customer and for the environment.
Yeah, okay, so if I was Viking, then I would talk more to my customers and find out what do they actually need and where are they moving, in order to find out how to make these agreements in the best way possible for them. So I would use more time on that instead of using time on thinking or imagining what the chief owners actually want. Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah, there's a lot of questions, but maybe to build on that. So you actually, what we need, so we have some conservatism. That's typically where you think there's a bottleneck there, lack of listening. It's always a bit difficult to, as in academic circle, to think that, because you don't know the situation. But could you think also of innovation? Yeah, how would you get such a company outside of that conservatism? Should we have kind of networking or an innovation hub or something like that? Yeah, it's not really a question, but it's more like a vision, because you said in the end, when you talked about the future, you want to understand more these developed guidelines, you want to test them more, that's clear. But you also thought, and that's why I thought it was interesting to have more sector supplements, sector specific things. So could you imagine that you try to make a focus on all the shipping industries and have nice examples inspiring them? Is that the way forward, or how you get these people outside of this lack of innovation, lack of listening to the customers, if that's true?
Yeah. One thing that I have experienced is that actually when you have these type of research projects, then that can open up for the collaboration between the supplier and the customer in a new setting that they're used to, because they usually go together and to come with their demands, and it's very, you know, it's for handling with a negotiation between them. But when we do it in a research setting, then suddenly they are a bit more allowed to actually discuss more conceptual ideas. So I think that's the nice thing with research projects, that it actually allows some alternative collaborations. And so I think that's one vehicle for this. And I don't know if inspiring cases will be enough to change things. I don't think so. I think it needs to be a concrete project where they go together and try it out.